open this meeting of the Planning Commission. Couple of reminders. If you want to speak, you can fill out a card, or when we call for that, you can come up and speak. If you're speaking for the public, you'll have 2 minutes. If you're the applicant, you'll have 10 minutes. Let's be courteous of each other. Let's turn off our cell phones. If you have to take a call, take it outside, and we'll just try to keep things moving here. I need approval for the minutes of the last meeting.
Second?
Thank you, Brenda, Weston. Matt? Minutes.
Yes.
Carolyn?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Brenda?
Yes.
Andreas?
Yay.
The minutes are approved. The chair has nothing to report. The vice chair is not here. It's up to you, Wayne.
We're down to 9 planning commission members. We're in the process of trying to get a couple of more. But with 9 planning commission members, 5 makes quorum. It's just really important, and just as a reminder, if you could let us know when we send those emails out and phone calls, please make sure you let us know if you can make the meeting, so we can plan accordingly. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anything else?
That's it.
Okay. All right, we'll start on our agenda items. The first item up is the ADU at approximately 2250 South, 1800 East. Hi, Ashley.
Good evening. So this is a conditional use request made by property owners Lance and Kaylin Frame for approval to construct a new detached ADU structure behind the existing single-family home at 2250 South, 1800 East. Staff is recommending approval of the request subject to conditions that are listed on the first page of your staff report. This project is being presented to Planning Commission because all ADU proposals within single-family zones require the conditional use review, and the subject property is located in the R1 7000 single-family zone. The review considers compatibility, location, configuration, and potential negative impacts of the use, and per state code, conditional uses are allowed uses if appropriate conditions can be applied to mitigate any adverse impacts. So the subject property is highlighted in yellow on these maps. It is located just south of 2100 South and east of Sugar House Park. The surrounding area is largely zoned R1 7000 single-family residential, and the property is a corner lot with frontage on both Parley's Canyon Boulevard and 1800 East, with an above-average lot area of approximately 10,802 square feet. The site currently contains a, this mouse works, no, a one-story single-family structure, a detached 2-car garage, and a small shed structure that the applicant would demolish if this ADU request is approved. So here's some pictures of those structures. On the top left, that's the front of the existing home from 1800 East. Top right is the frontage on Parley's Canyon Boulevard. And this is actually from an angle where you can see the most into this property. From almost any other angle looking at this frontage, you can't see as much of the structures or the backyard of this property. And then the bottom picture is me standing at that curb cut. You can see the detached 2-car garage on the left that would remain, and then that small white shed structure would be demolished if this request is approved. So this conditional use review is for the new ADU use and structure only, but the submitted plans do reflect some additional improvements the applicant would make concurrently with the ADU project. These extra items do impact the ADU, but do not require Planning Commission approval. They could be completed with a building permit, and they don't require any special kind of review process. So the first extra project component is the construction of a breezeway that would connect the existing single-family home to the existing detached garage that's on site. Per zoning ordinance, creating a substantial building connection like this makes it so what is currently viewed as two structures would be viewed as one structure, which is similar to a single-family home with an attached garage. And making this connection does impact the ADU, as the maximum footprint of the ADU is limited to 50% of the footprint of the existing principal structure. So making this breezeway connection essentially increases the footprint of that existing principal structure. It increases the maximum permitted ADU footprint from 423 if the house was just standing on its own and not connected to the garage to 650 square feet. And making the connection also creates the potential to construct a new detached garage on the property. In the R1 7000 zoning district, accessory structures are limited to the same building coverage limit of 50% of the footprint of the principal structure, up to a maximum of 720 square feet. So because the existing garage would be viewed as an attached garage, there is the potential now to build a new detached accessory structure, which the applicant is proposing to do. And then as for the ADU structure, it's proposed to be located 4 feet off the rear property line, and would be screened from street view to the north by the new two-car garage, and from street view to the east by the existing single-family home and the existing garage. And then it is proposed to be sited approximately 27 feet from the property line to the south, and it would be a minimum of 60 feet away from any principal structures on adjacent properties. These are all 4 elevations of the proposed ADU. It does have a proposed footprint of 649 square feet and a pitched roof not to exceed 17 feet in height. The structure has entrances on the north and south elevations, but both of them would be, neither of them would be visible from 18th East or Parley's Canyon Boulevard due to the siting of the new garage and the existing structures to the east. The primary building materials include hardy board siding, asphalt roof shingles, and then aluminum gutters, soffit, and fascia. And the interior would contain 1 bedroom, 1.5 bathrooms, and it'd have a combined kitchen and living area. And again, the scope of review this evening is limited to the ADU use and structure. None of the other discussed elements would be under review. And the project was reviewed against the ADU zoning standards and the conditional use standards. Staff is recommending approval with conditions. And just to briefly touch on those, the first one would require that the certificate of occupancy for the ADU would not be issued until the breezeway connection passes the final building inspection, and that is because that connection does provide for a larger ADU footprint. And the second one is just, this is just to ensure compliance with the zoning for ADUs, but the one egress window that would be required on the west elevation, it can't be any larger than necessary to comply with minimum egress requirements in the building code. And the other 2 conditions are standard regarding the registration process and the scope of approval. That's everything.
Questions for Ashley right now?
So on the south, how far is the main house from the proper? I'm trying to figure out where the backyard, or where the side versus backyard kind of sits, or does it not matter because it's a corner lot? Like, how far is that house from that property line?
Sorry, where at?
The principal structure, so the existing SF home
Yeah.
to the property line, is that 4 feet or 10 feet, or how far is that?
The south?
Yeah, to the south.
I don't think it is shown on the plans, but the bottom of the southernmost point of the ADU to the property line is about 27 feet. So probably about 10 feet, I'm guessing. I'm not sure.
So to give you a little info on where the yard areas are considered on this, where the proposed ADU is located would actually be considered the rear yard in this case. So that southern property line would actually be considered an interior side yard.
Okay. And you can go 4 feet to the property line?
Yes,
on a-
or 6 feet, I believe, in this zone.
Okay. On a rear yard property line, okay. All right.
On the side property line. The rear, it's like 25 feet.
That's from the main house, right?
That's for the main house only, though. You can put accessory buildings in the rear yard.
Okay. And is there a limit on how far you are from the property line with an accessory unit, or no?
So the required setback, the structure has to be at least 4 feet from any side or rear lot line. And then there's some other provisions for, where there's a required 10-foot setback. If it was taller than 17 feet, it would have to have a 10-foot setback. I can't remember the other provisions. There's a couple other instances where it would have to have a 10-foot setback.
And then is the new 2-car garage for the existing home, or is that for the ADU?
Just in conversation with the applicant at the Sugar House Community Council meeting, he's indicated his intention is to move into the ADU himself, and that 2-car garage, he would use that with, kind of in tandem with the ADU unit. The ADU doesn't have a parking requirement, but there's more off-street parking being provided than what's necessary or what's required.
Okay. I'm gonna ask some other questions later, but that's fine. Thank you.
Is, any other questions for Ashley right now? Is the applicant here? Does he want to speak?
Yeah, I think he doesn't have a presentation. I think he'd like to speak.
Okay. Come on up, state your name for the record, and you'll have 10 minutes.
So I'm Lance Frame. My wife is still at work, so she couldn't make it. But thank you so much for the opportunity to present my family's project before the committee. This project's truly been an amazing team effort and collaboration every step of the way with the city. We've been collaborating with city officials for over a year, if you count kind of our feedback on the ADU ordinance and this actual project. And regarding the ordinance, I submitted public comments multiple times. I had multiple email conversations with Amy on the council, who's our committee member. And I met in person with Nick Norris of planning to provide my input. And so I feel like I tried to engage as much as I could with the legislative process. And then Ashley has been our main contact at planning through this drafting process, and she's been very helpful. And I'm thankful to everyone for their help to get the project to this point. Our project represents an opportunity to fulfill one of the city's main goals, as outlined in the 5-year housing plan for Salt Lake City, which is goal number 2, to increase housing opportunities for cost-burdened households. When we purchased our home, it required a tremendous amount of sacrifice. And in order to keep up with payments and taxes and everything, it's been a significant burden. The lack of housing stock and subsequent rising cost of housing in Salt Lake is an issue that hits very close to home for our family. The ADU ordinance represents a path to alleviate a portion of this heavy burden that we feel. I'm extremely grateful for this ordinance, which could potentially allow us an opportunity to improve our family's quality of life and help the city achieve their housing goals at the same time. We love our neighborhood, and we have made a strong effort to design this project to integrate with the surrounding structures in both design and scope. It's our sincere hope that this project will beautify the neighborhood and be a positive addition to Sugar House. We're humbly asking for your approval to move forward with this project. Thank you.
Okay, stay right there. Anybody have questions for the applicant?
Yes. What is the material on the exterior of your building?
Yeah, so it's called Hardy Board. It's cement siding. I think the design is called Board and Bat, if I'm not mistaken, and it'll be painted white.
Can you explain the site plan, where the concrete is and where it isn't? Can you kind of show us that on?
Yeah, so I don't know if, so the existing curb cut, I don't know if I just,
But you can't, I need you to be on the microphone, so.
Does the existing curb cut is going to stay exactly how it is. So the garage, and the garage is actually a one-car garage. We made that tweak about a week ago, the new garage. And so there will be from the existing driveway, it'll go right into the one-car garage. So there'll be no, besides a very small additional piece of concrete that we'd be pouring to get that corner piece so it's easier to get into the one-car garage. There will be no kind of additional driveway being poured. The part to the north of the new garage will be landscaped. We're planning to put a hedge along that north fence, and then we'll have a pathway. It's most likely going to be brick between the ADU and the existing garage, kind of the pathway to the back. And then the rest will be grass in the backyard, most likely.
I guess I'm getting confused by the line here that is actually the setback line, not a line about,
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
everybody is confused as me.
This
Yes,
this one?
yes.
that the
No,
one?
this is the sort of dotted line is not indicating,
So the dotted line, I think, is the buildable area.
that's the setback
Oh, okay,
line.
yeah,
It's not the line of
the
anything-
concrete,
anything
okay.
on the ground. The stuff on the ground is actually there, but it's very, very light.
Any other questions? From anybody? Okay, we'll have you step back. We'll open the public meeting on the, if you have cards, bring them up. We'll open the public meeting on this item. Yes, we do. Okay. Okay, first card I have is Judy Short. Are you here for the community council? So say your name for the record and you get 5 minutes.
My name is Judy Short, and I'm the Land Use Chair for the Sugar House Community Council. This is really an interesting project, and I think we asked as many questions as you did because it's difficult to figure out, driving by 4 times and looking at it, trying to figure out where it's going to go. But I think this is a good solution. And we don't basically have any negative comments about this. But we did get confused by the ordinance. So the ADU ordinance says the size of your ADU cannot exceed 50% of your home square footage. So in this case, the square footage is about 1,000. Now that's different. Her report said footprint, mine says footage, but the numbers don't matter. But the petitioner has figured out he can put a breezeway between the house and garage, and thus his ADU can be 50% of the square footage of the 2 parcels combined. And apparently this is common practice. And she even gave me the definitions, and I guess those are in some ordinance somewhere. But why wasn't it in the ADU ordinance? That's what kind of threw us completely for a loop. Because on this parcel, it works very well because there's 10,000 square feet. But I can see a lot of people doing that to cram, you know, it's my new favorite word now, cram another building onto a very small lot. So I guess I would like to see you talk about that in conjunction with what's in the ordinance and whether it should only apply if the lot is over so many square feet or something, so that we don't end up with, you know, lots of concrete on a parcel. But we can still have our accessory dwelling units. So, And we're also worried, and I'll say it every time we have one of these, I'll say it, this is not going to be an affordable unit. And I'm not sure the accessory dwelling unit is going to be an affordable unit, because the requirements like a separate sewer line, water line, things like that are adding the cost. I'm told it's $30,000 to build that, which is quite a bit of money. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. The next card I have is from Lynn Schwartz. State your name into the microphone for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
My name is Lynn Schwartz. I'm the Vice Chair of the Sugar House Community Council Land Use and Zoning Committee. While this project meets the letter of the ADU regulations, it is a lesson in how, if a loophole exists, someone will exploit it. It is clear that the spirit of the ADU requirements was that the ADU would be significantly smaller than the primary residence. However, using the pretext of attaching a garage with a breezeway, the lot will have 2 residences of essentially the same above-ground footage and 2 two-car garages. It kills me to oppose this project because it is clear that the owners need to rent out the primary residence, and because they are the first project in a long time that does not use Lego architectural design. I would also add that all the ADUs we have seen that will be rented will be market rate, so that the goal of affordability has yet to be realized. Thank you.
Thank you. The next card I have is Thomas Olson. State your name in the microphone for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
My name is Thomas Olson. I live in 2250 Hannibal, 1 street west of this property. The biggest concern I have is the setbacks. We have 16 feet requirement, I believe. The garage on both the properties due west of this property are going to be, they have garages which are well within the 16 feet required. Also, my major concern is parking. We have serious issues in our area with parking. We have a lot of people in that area. Parking is at a premium. People are parking 1 car in front of 1 house instead of 2 cars in front of 1 house, and we're running out of space. We just have no more space for more cars on the area. It's difficult enough as it is, especially when schools open, to park. There is no parking on Parley's Canyon Boulevard. You got bike lanes. You can't park there. Once you start parking the other cars on 1800 and Hannibal Street, there's just no more parking in the area. It's going to be a big mess. I recommend we do not approve this.
Thank you. And I have a card from Jason Mendenhall. State your name for the record into the microphone, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Jason Mendenhall, thank you very much for your time. I live just west of the property. We share a fence line. I bought my house 4 years ago. And part of the serenity of the neighborhood is the space in between the houses due to the yards. These houses were built in the 40s, and they're 80 years old, and I've wanted to live in this neighborhood my whole life. It took me till I was 34 to afford it, and so I understand, that it's hard to pay your mortgage, and you might have to supplement that with a secondary apartment on the property, but I could look out the window and see 20 different apartment complexes being built. And I just feel like, that having this unit 5 feet from my fence with the windows towering over into my yard is something I never expected from such an established community. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that's all the cards I have. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this particular issue? Anyone? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and bring this back up to the commission. Do we want staff or the applicant back for questions? Yes, no, maybe? Ashley?
Yeah, maybe Ashley. would be
Ashley,
good.
please.
Ashley, could you just maybe speak to the issue of, Matt asked about the setback requirement on the rear yard there. And then just, I think, helpful for the public to maybe speak through the design of fencing versus windows and, what sort of, are there any windows that are overlooking, because there's no second story, it's just the pitched roof, correct?
Yeah, it's one story with a pitched roof.
Okay, and so then all the windows that would be facing the rear yards of the houses on Hannibal Street, the windows should be, because is there a 6-foot fencing requirement with this?
No, there's not.
There's no fencing requirement.
There's not a fencing requirement. There is a fence there, though,
Okay.
I believe.
And do you know if those windows would be below the existing fence, or do you not know?
So on this slide, it would be the west elevation would be facing towards the rear yard. So there are 3 windows there. I don't have dimensions. I don't have heights for them,
Okay,
but I would assume it'd be within range of a 6-foot fence.
yeah, I would imagine it would be too. Okay,
Yeah,
Although-
they are also, they have to be opaque,
oh, they do have to be open, okay.
Yeah.
That's,
all
okay.
of them, yeah.
And that's
By-
because they're facing the,
It's because if the windows are facing a side or rear property line, if they're within 10 feet of the property line, they have to be opaque. Or we also encourage them to use like a clerestory window that would be actually a higher window to let light in without being at, I guess, human level.
gotcha, okay. All right, great, thank you.
Any more questions for Ashley? Any discussion? Somebody ready to make a motion? Andreas, you're thinking, come on.
Oh, I'm just thinking, the public does raise a good comment, but I think Judy made a very, very good comment that in this case, perhaps it's not that big of a problem, but it can in other subsequent petitions for ADU. So we may have to look into that for future cases. All in all, though, I think the project makes sense to me. So.
Okay.
For staff, there's nothing in code that talks about the height or anything of buildings, these ADUs. It's just built to whatever the current structure could be. Is that?
There is a height requirement. So the maximum is 17 feet. But if the principal structure is taller than 17 feet, it can be up to the height of the principal structure, up to 24 feet, provided it has a 10-foot setback from the property lines. So it can match the height of the principal structure up to 24 feet as long as they provide greater setbacks.
But this, because it doesn't have a 10-foot setback, is limited to 17 feet. Is
Yeah,
that
they've
right?
designed it to 17 feet. So they just have to meet the minimum, which is 4 feet. And then the elevations that have the entrances have to have at least 10 feet, which it does.
Since we're learning about the ADUs as we go along here a little bit, can you talk a little bit more about the difference between the 50% of the footprint of the home versus the square foot of the home, and how that, and is it common when we have that sort of standard, 50% of the main structure for an accessory unit or whatever, does it always take into consideration the garage footprint as well? Or is that unique to ADUs?
So I guess to answer the second question first, we would just always consider the principal structure. That's the language that's in the ordinance. So if it's a single-family home that has an attached garage, we would consider the footprint of that whole structure.
And that would include the garage
Yeah,
if it were
Yeah.
attached.
But then
You're saying
why is-
footprint, do you mean square footage or footprint?
footprint. That's, the ordinance regulates the ADU footprint based on the footprint of the principal structure.
So we need to be careful in writing these up, not to use the word square footage of the house, because that could include a second story, a third story, all kinds of
The
things. right?
ordinance does also it limits square footage of the ADU to 650 as well, to prevent the
The 650
two-story.
is the top, you can
Oh,
have
that's
it
the max.
any
650
space.
living area, yeah.
Oh,
We
okay.
recently did one that had a garage on the first level and an ADU on the second level, and the ADU was still the living area was limited to 650.
So this one's Is the garage and the ADU 650 square feet, both those structures, or is the ADU itself 650 and then the two-car garage is
Only
it's along
one
that?
car.
The
wet-
EDU itself is 649 technically, and then the detached garage, it's on the plans. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's not part of this request, but it's well underneath how big of a garage they could
But
have.
why is, I mean, garage is clearly built for the ADU. In this case, we've got the principal home being added to a garage to get additional square footage. But why is that second garage square footage not, because it's just not separated, not counted as part of the, if you did a breezeway between the ADU and the second garage, would that then make, you would then count both those footprints in the 650 requirement?
Yeah, so we count when it comes to how big of a footprint the EDU can have, we total the principal structure, the breezeway coverage, and the garage, which puts them over the, I guess, 1,300. So they could have 650, which is the max. And the ADU ordinance specifies that it does not count towards, so the accessory structure coverage requirement is separate. ADU footprint is not counted towards accessory structure footprint or coverage. So we're kind of looking at these as two separate things.
And that's because they're not attached. But if they were attached, you would be looking at it as one. If that that new two-car garage was attached to the proposed ADU, you would be looking at them as one structure.
Yeah, I mean, it couldn't be feasible. They couldn't be attached at the ground level in this case because they would exceed 650.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So what I'm getting at here is, it's like we're attaching a garage over to an existing home, and that's permitting the landowner to expand the square footage of the ADU. Because it seems like to me, like I'm trying to get around, are we building an ADU or are we just building a second building or lot, and then versus then we've got the second garage which is being built, which is going to go towards the ADU. It's for the use of the ADU, which I do think is great and a good addition because I think it addresses some of the parking concerns that often come with these. So clearly you got 2 cars to park in a 650 square unit, so that's good. But then we're permitting that 2-car garage to be built in addition to a 650 square foot ADU. So it's even though they are related, right, to each other, the total square footage of those 2 units is pretty significant.
I need to clarify that. The
They're
650 is
independent of each
only
other.
for the accessory dwelling unit, not the entire, so if
I
they,
understand that.
if they
But what I'm
combine the
saying-
new garage with the accessory dwelling unit, the new garage would not count towards the 650.
If we had a breezeway between the proposed ADU and the new garage would then be counted in that 650 square feet. It would not.
Only the ADU, only the dwelling unit is limited to the 650.
So you can sit one on top of a garage, for
That's right. So
example.
that's why when we have accessory dwelling units that some are being built with a garage underneath and the dwelling unit above, it's not the entire square footage of that structure itself.
Okay.
The dwelling unit is limited to 650 or 50% of the footprint of the house.
Okay.
And I know it's kind of a struggle, but the
No, I got it.
fact,
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
the
I
fact they're
understand.
putting but the
I
fact
understand how
that,
the code's written.
Yeah.
It's fine. I'm on the same page.
but the question about them adding that breezeway isn't part of the conditional use.
I understand that.
Okay. Somebody ready to make a motion? Dead silence. Come on. One way or the other.
I will go ahead and make a motion.
Thank you, Weston.
I will move to approve the conditions, or based on the findings listed in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use for the ADU, subject to the following conditions listed in the staff report recommended by staff. And this is for, I should say, for PLN PCM 2019-00263.
I'll second.
Thank you, Brenda. Any discussion? Okay, Matt.
I know. You should start in the direction. Yes, it generally meets the criteria.
Is that a yay?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to be clear. Carolyn?
Agree.
Weston?
Yes.
Brenda?
Yes.
Andreas?
I do want to thank the applicant. It is a very difficult process to have to go through, so thank you for that. Yes.
All right, the motion passes. Thank you.
I would like to make a comment, though, that I think that this is something that we do need to consider and perhaps ask the planning staff to look at the definitions of the square footage of the principal unit in the ADU ordinance, so that something like this on a larger, yes, on a larger lot like this it really does appear like 2 units, but on a smaller lot, this could be a real disaster. So.
I mean, I'm thinking about just the impact to the neighbors to the west. I mean, I get on a large, that was my grapple with, on a large property of 7,000 square feet, you're buying in the R7000 district, you expect to have some distance from people around you, and that maybe is why you chose that zone. I think this changes that a little bit, but that was my grapple.
You had a comment, Wayne?
Well, I was just going to try to clarify a little on the building. There's a question of this whole building connection and attaching the garage to the principal structure. There's not a lot of locations in the city that this could even happen, because in most cases, accessory buildings are built within setback areas. And if, in that case, you cannot connect the principal structure to the accessory structure, because that would be a violation of a setback of the principal structure. There's very few parcels in the city where the accessory building is actually in a buildable area and can meet the zoning requirements to allow them to attach it. So it's not going to be a big kind of issue that we have to the city.
Thanks. We'll move on to our second item, which is an ADU at approximately 64 West Andrew Avenue. Christina, welcome.
Good evening. So this is a request by Assist Inc. Community Design Center in collaboration with the University of Utah School of Architecture, who you see some students behind me here. And they're also representing the property owners at 64 West Andrew Avenue. They are requesting a conditional use approval to construct an accessory dwelling unit to the rear of the house of the property. And staff is recommending approval with conditions. Okay, and then I don't want to repeat everything that Ashley just talked about, but
Could you get a little closer to the microphone, please?
is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So this project is before the commission because the proposed ADU is located in the R1 5000 single-family residential zoning district. The ADU proposal is located in single-family zoning districts require a conditional use process. The process looks at compatibility, location, configuration, and potential impacts of the request. And just a reminder that conditional uses are allowed if appropriate conditions can be imposed to mitigate any concerns. So the proposed accessory dwelling unit is 650 square feet, and the height is proposed at 17 feet, which are the maximum square footage and height allowed. The parking, as you see on the site plan, they have 2 parking stalls that are for the main residents that are covered. They do not have a legal 3rd stall on site, and they also don't have legal street parking, but they are within a 4th mile of a UTA bus stop, which is on State Street and about 15th South, so the parking requirement can be waived. The entrance from the ADU faces the rear of the primary residence, which faces Andrew Avenue. And the closest house on the adjacent property is about approximately 50 feet away. So it's a deep, narrow lot. And then just some pictures of the site and the surrounding development. So this image here on the left is the primary residence on the site. You can see a little bit, there's a wood fence and some flags above the wood fence, and that's approximately where the ADU would be in the rear of the property. And then this is the adjacent home to the west of the site. And then these images show the surrounding context. So the first image on the top left is the home directly to the east. And then the upper right-hand corner is the home that is 2 parcels to the west. And I wanted to show this one that you would be able to see the accessory dwelling unit through the property here, as well as the property on West Temple, which is this bottom right or bottom left picture. You would have a visible view of the accessory dwelling unit from that parcel as well. Although on my site visit, I didn't feel that they were significant impacts, and that with the vegetation and the fence that currently surround the property, they're pretty well mitigated. And then the other image on here is just across the street. There is a church across the street from the property. As part of the process, we notified, as part of the early notification process, property owners and residents within 300 feet of the property. The community council also hosted a small community meeting where the applicant was present, as well as staff, and the applicant gave a presentation. No public comment has been received to date, though. And staff is recommending approval with the conditions in your staff report. The first one is just that windows are no larger than necessary. Our zoning review requested another look at those, although they do appear to comply. They just requested another look, so that is a condition, as well as that the typical registration requirements would be met, as far as that the property owner would live on site, and if they are not renting the property to a relative, then they would go through the Good Landlord program. And with that,
Hang on, see if we have any questions for you. Any questions on this one?
So it doesn't have
it doesn't. They could go through a special exception process to legalize the on-site parking, but they are within a 4th mile of a transit stop.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions right now? Is your applicant here?
Yes.
Are they prepared to speak? State your name for the record into the mic, and you'll have 10 minutes.
In as much as anybody can be prepared to speak. Jason Wheeler with Assist Community Design Center. Happy to be here representing Prabhu Dolma, who is the owner of the property, along with their husband Tapten Kunga. And they're a multi-generational family from Tibet, actually, and have been living in the home for about 15 years, and essentially are at a point where they need some additional space. It is a deep lot, as Chrissy mentioned, and kind of a deep, narrow lot. And what's interesting is because it faces south on these blocks that are primarily oriented east-west, most of the other properties that back up to this property are also deep lots, but they're perpendicular to the lot that we're looking at. So, as Chrissy mentioned, the closest primary residence is about 50 feet away, so there's some substantial separation. I think one really neat thing about this project is it's a collaboration with the University of Utah School of Architecture design build program, where the students will actually be helping to construct the home for the family to help make it more affordable. It will be in the immediate term occupied by residents of the family, of the immediate family, and as was mentioned, they don't have any plans at the time to rent it out to somebody else, but they would go through the Good Landlord program, as obviously there's nothing that would prevent them from doing that in the future. We're excited for this project, excited to be presenting to the Planning Commission, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, any questions?
Could you please explain the Good Landlord program?
Sure, the Good Landlord Program is a program that the city has, and I don't know it real well, honestly, but anybody who is going to be renting out an accessory dwelling unit or a basement apartment or an attic apartment to somebody else, to legally do so would be required to complete the Good Landlord Program. My understanding on that is that there are once you've done that there are certain restrictions in terms of who you can and cannot rent to, and basically it's just teaching somebody who wouldn't typically be a developer or a landlord about what it means to be a landlord. So.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, Carolyn.
Hi, it looks as though currently the current owners or somebody parks at least 2 cars outside of the covered parking.
Mm-hmm.
And could park 3 more cars there too. It looks like, stacking them in there.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a plan for, would the person who occupies the back, I mean, is there any limit to parking in the front yard, so to speak, like this?
So my understanding of the parking ordinance, and this is an understanding that I've come to very painfully, is that if you park in the front yard setback, my home is in the Avenues, I've received a ticket on my own vehicle for parking in the front yard setback in my own property. So my understanding is that if they were to park a vehicle there, they could be ticketed by the city. Currently, there is enough space in that front yard setback to park 2 additional cars stacked, and then on the side, in the side yard setback, there's also space for a 3rd additional car. So you could easily fit 5 to 6 vehicles parked in the yard there, including in that covered area. They will not be adding any additional parking at this time with the addition of the ADU, as there's not going to be any change in the family dynamics or family structure. They're just simply going to be moving Ms. Prabhu from the main house into the ADU.
Maybe when staff comes back, you can ask again. Any other questions for the applicant?
Oh, I have another question.
Okay.
So what is the material of this, exterior material of this building?
I believe it's wood is what has been proposed by the students. Is that correct? Yeah, so they're planning on wood siding for the home.
Like as in cedar siding or clapboard siding or?
It would be a clapboard style siding is what they're proposing. It's the hope is honestly there is at the back of the home currently there is a detached accessory structure that's being used for some storage. It's been there for a while, and there's a lot of good wood in there, and they're actually hoping to reclaim, strip, and then reuse that wood with the construction of the house for part of the house. So,
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have a question. Were you present at the exposition at the community council? How was the project received by those in attendance? Do you remember?
it was received well. There weren't any specific comments from people about this specific house. There was just some curiosity about the ADU ordinance in general. And one person did ask the question about renting out, like what's to prohibit this family from renting this property to somebody else in the future? And the answer to that is nothing really, right? But that's not necessarily something that's governed by the ADU. So that was the only question that somebody had.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And we met, when I went out there to take some measurements, I did speak with, can I play with your arrows here? Okay, so I spoke with the homeowner at bottom left-hand side there, just to get permission to access the property so we could get a measurement between that house, which is the closest house, and where the ADU would be. The side of the ADU would be immediately behind that house with that 50-foot separation. And she came out into the backyard with me. She says, I'm just curious to see. And she didn't seem to have any objections. So.
Okay. Any more questions? I don't see any, so step back. We'll do the public hearing. Okay, I'll open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone from the community council here who wishes to speak? Is there anyone from the public who wishes to speak on this item? Come on up, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Nicole Zananti. So we've been working with the Kunga family for about a year. The Kunga family migrated from Tibet, and about 15 years ago, they worked with the University of Utah as well. When Ms. Kunga got into a car accident, and the car rolled, and it caused her to be paralyzed from the waist down. So this ADU would also be an accessible ADU. Our nonprofit directly works with a lot of individuals with disabilities, and we hear a lot of questions about housing specific to individuals with disabilities. So kind of another aspect of this specific structure is if they were to rent it out, they could potentially rent it out to someone who has a physical disability. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else wish to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and bring it back up to the commission. Chris, I think we need you back. Could you talk a little bit about the parking situation here?
Yes. So the parking, as was brought up by Commissioner Scheer, there is parking on site that you can see in the photos, but according to our ordinance, that's technically considered front yard parking because it's in the front yard setback and it's the permeable surface. So they could go through the process of what's a special exception to legalize that parking, but right now the parking that's not under the carport wouldn't be considered legal under the parameters of the zoning ordinance.
So there's 2 existing places that are legal parking places.
Yes, and those are for the primary residence, though. Yep. And then the street parking, if you look in the photos, it appears that they have street parking, but it's actually not legal either because it's just a couple inches off from the 5-foot setback from a fire hydrant. So
It does, and Chrissy, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like there might be more parking under that structure, which I guess can be seen as a carport in the front. It looks like you could fit 2 cars under there, which would be 2 legal parking locations. And then also the spot that is to the side of that could be considered.
Because it's not in the setback.
Because it's not in the front yard setback, it's actually behind the front line of that building right there. That could be considered a parking stall too. So I believe there's probably 3 legal parking stalls on this site.
And this ADU doesn't require a parking place because it's close to public transit.
correct.
Does that help your parking situation?
Of course.
Any more questions for Chrissy? Seeing none, any discussion, a motion?
You know, I like, I mean, the project is, you know, it's a very, very nice cause. I really like the idea behind it. It works really well. But I can kind of see Matt's point of view a little more in this one too, because in the other one that we had the, you know, the parking with everything on it. This one, which I know we have those exceptions as well. And that's the only thing that's kind of in my mind, kind of processing as to how that would affect that block or that neighborhood and those. But seeing that the comments at the public presentation was relatively positive, you know, it's kind of a solution in that as well. So I'm still mulling over that parking, kind of like, you know, that previous one as well. So.
But they don't need a parking spot for this one at all, so, okay.
A motion?
Yeah, I'll do it. Let's get this going here.
You can do it.
Okay. Regarding PLN PCM 2019-00325, which is the ADU 64 West Andrew Avenue. Based on the findings listing in the staff report, the information presented and input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use.
I'll second.
Okay.
Are there conditions in the staff report that need to be
Okay.
included?
Final approval of the detail noted in the following conditions shall be delegated to the planning staff, which would be 1 through 4.
Okay, thank you.
Second this time for real.
Thanks, Matt. Any discussion? We'll start with Andreas this time.
Yes, I will vote yes. Very nice design, by the way. Very nice. Thank you.
Brenda?
I'm going to ask a question of Paul first. Do I need to recuse myself?
So, I posed the question to Wayne as we were beginning. Were you involved in any way in consulting with, or
Nope.
you had no involvement in the project?
Nope.
Then you're good.
I vote yes.
Thank you, Brenda. Weston?
I think this is a great project. I'm excited that there was such a collaborative effort for it. I think it's exactly what the ADU ordinance was put in place for this exact situation, and I hope it helps improve your family life. And I'm excited for you, so I vote yes.
Carolyn?
I agree, and thank you, students, for being and helping out in the community. Very nice.
Matt?
It's great. Yes.
Thank you. It passes. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the third item on the agenda is text amendments to the RMF 30 low-density multifamily residential district. Lauren?
Oh, you guys need to stay for this.
This is the
This
exciting
is really
one.
interesting, you know? Come on.
I know how to clear a room, I think. Alrighty, so I'll go ahead and get started. But before I begin, I do want to point out that staff is actually recommending that you table this item tonight. There is still a bit of fine tuning that needs to be done to the actual text amendment language that we kind of caught at the last minute. But we did want to continue with the public hearing and hear from the public, as well as get your feedback, since we briefed you on this back in December. So we did want to move forward with it, but we're recommending tabling. So as we discussed previously last December, facilitating new housing development for our growing population is a top priority of the current administration. Per the current 5-year housing plan, a major goal is to, quote, reach a point where all residents of Salt Lake City, current and prospective, regardless of race, age, economic status, or physical ability, can find a place to call home. So not only does this goal emphasize the creation of more housing in general, but the creation of different types of housing for people in various stages of their lives that have different needs. So with this in mind, the city's housing plan specifically calls for the removal of strict zoning regulations that can impede creative housing solutions, like some of the regulations within our multifamily zoning districts. Therefore, multiple updates are being proposed to the RMF low-density multifamily residential zoning district, which we will be going through tonight. So as a reminder about the RMF 30 district, there are actually 4 multifamily residential districts in our city, ranging from low density, or the RMF 30, to the highest density, or the RMF 75. The goal is to solidify updates to the RMF 30 to start, and then come back and update the 3 other multifamily districts in a similar manner. So looking solely at the RMF 30, which you can see on this map here, there are
there are approximately 1,028 properties located in this district that are greater than 2,600 square feet or adequately sized to build upon. 331, or about a third, are located in a local historic district where demolition is harder to achieve. The majority of the parcels in this district, or 565, have single-family homes, 130 have duplexes, 178 have multifamily buildings or have 3 or more units, and then the rest really vary in terms of non-conforming commercial uses and larger planned developments. I wanted to show you all this map that illustrates the amount of land that's really zoned multifamily residential. So you can see that in the orange. And then the yellow is the single-family residential in our city. And then the gray would be commercial, industrial, things of that nature. So you can see it's kind of a smaller area that's actually zoned specifically for multifamily residential. Okay, so let's dive into the changes or the proposed text amendments. And so the first thing that's being proposed is to introduce design standards for new buildings in this district. And many of our other zoning districts already have design standards for new construction, but not the multifamily residential. And this is something that the community has asked for before, and we think will encourage compatibility with new multifamily buildings. So at this point, we'd be requiring building entrances on ground street-facing facades, and then for those entrances, we'd also require entry features. We are requiring 50% durable material on a front-facing facade. And when we brought this to you last time, that number was 70%, and based on some feedback we've heard, we'd like to lower that a little bit due to the expense. We're also not restricting EIFS as we were before. And so the rest of the 50%, you could use a material like that. And then we'd be requiring 20% glass on the ground street-facing floor and 15% on the upper street-facing floor. Blank walls cannot exceed 15 feet. And then we would also be requiring some screening of mechanical equipment and service areas if there are any within a development. So those are the design standards being introduced. Next, we would like to allow specific building forms outright. So these building forms in particular can accommodate a higher number of units while remaining compatible with single-family development. So therefore, the proposal includes allowing these 3 building forms that typically would require special approval to be located on their own lots. So the first is a cottage development, which consists of 2 or more small-scale single-family homes or cottage-type units, arranged uniformly on a lot around open space or green space. And per our conversation last time, we are limiting the size of the cottages to 850 square feet of usable floor area, not including the basement. So that's going to be limited instead of an 850 square foot footprint. Next, when we brought this out to the community, we heard a lot, or got a lot of interest in allowing tiny homes and allowing them on their own lot. And so we're introducing this building form of tiny homes, which would be limited to 400 square feet in area. And that is consistent with the International Building Code's definition of a tiny home that's limited to 400 square feet. And they would be allowed on a 1,500 square foot lot. And then third, we would like to allow side-oriented row houses that share the same configuration as a normal row house, where the units are attached side by side, but each unit's entryway is oriented to the side or interior of the lot as opposed to all facing the street. So you see these a lot coming through as planned developments. And then also, as we talked about at the briefing, we kind of tweaked the standards for these side-oriented row houses. So they would be kind of held to higher standards in order to be approved without plan development. We would be requiring a front building entry. Garage doors cannot be on the front of the unit. We would be requiring some form of delineation of the sides of the units, in addition to having entry features on each of the units. And then there'd be required glass, not only on the front, like all other building forms, but there'd be required glass on the interior facades for these types of units. So, next, we are proposing changes to required lot area in these districts. So in the city's multifamily residential zones, the zoning ordinance requires that a lot can be a certain size to accommodate a certain number of dwelling units. As seen on this table, per today's code, you need 5,000 square feet of land for a single-family home, 8,000 square feet for a duplex, and 3,000 square feet for each unit within a multifamily building. If you'll take a look at this distribution graph, almost half of the lots in this district range between 3,000 and 6,000 square feet, meaning they couldn't accommodate anything more than a single unit. Therefore, we are proposing to reduce the lot area required per dwelling unit in this district for all land uses and slightly more for row houses, cottage developments, and tiny homes to encourage those more compatible missing middle type building forms. With smaller lot size requirements, we also hope that this will drive the construction of smaller, more affordable units. So this proposal differs a little bit from last time you saw this because we are proposing to reduce the requirement for single family, two family, and multifamily uses from 3,000 square feet a unit to 2,500 square feet a unit. And with these changes, 39% of lots in this district would become eligible to add at least one more unit. So just as an example, if you take a look at these existing buildings in our city, so here at 825 South, 800 East, this currently has 12 units on 17,500 square feet. And so with our current area standards, they'd be able to get 5 units. With the proposed area standards for a row house form or a cottage form, which this is kind of like a mix of the two, they could get 11. So it's not quite what they have today, but closer. And then for a multifamily form, which is like an apartment or a condo building, they could get 7 multifamily units with the proposed changes to area. And this is just looking at area. And then we look at this apartment style building that exists today. We have 16 units on 8,429 square feet of land. They would currently be allowed to have 2 units per our current standards. And we are proposing to allow 5 row house or cottage units and 3 multifamily units. So you can kind of get an idea of, we're trying to shoot for the middle ground here.
So these are non-conforming uses right now?
Yes, in terms of area. Okay, moving on to the next text amendment, which would be to remove required lot width. Previously, we had proposed to just reduce required lot width because currently the requirement is 80 feet. A lot has to be 80 feet wide in order to accommodate a multifamily use. And as I've tried to illustrate here, most of the lots in our city or in the RMF 30 district are nowhere near 80 feet wide. So we had proposed to reduce this requirement down to 50 feet, but we've found that there are many other drivers of sufficient lot width and adequate spacing between units, including required driveway widths, required setbacks, building code requirements and things of that nature. So we're proposing to eliminate required lot width because there's other drivers that will ensure we have adequate spacing between buildings. And this is one of the other zoning barriers that we just feel we need to get rid of. Moving on, we would like to require more or allow more than one structure on a lot, which is currently not permitted, to discourage buildings that are hard to access or have little visibility for safety purposes. However, again, there are other building code and fire standards in place to encourage visibility and access. And this, having more than one structure on a lot, is a historic development pattern that we see throughout the city. This is just an example of, I believe it's a fourplex in the front with a duplex to the rear. And so you can see it fits nicely on this lot. And so allowing more than one principal structure on a lot can also encourage more creative housing development. So this is something that we would like to allow outright instead of having to go through plan development approval. So finally, with these changes, staff realizes that some development pressure may be put on single-family homes inside and outside of local historic districts. Therefore, in order to discourage the collection or banking of multiple parcels of land to accommodate large developments, a lot width maximum is now being proposed that would limit the width of new lots to 110 feet wide or less. So instead of having a lot width minimum, we're actually having a lot width maximum because we don't want developers coming in, land banking, wiping out what's there, and starting over. We want to try and preserve some of what's there. Additionally, we are proposing to allow a unit bonus when a building permit is pulled for an additional housing unit on a lot and the existing structure on the lot is retained. The idea is that if a lot can now accommodate one more unit with the changes to area, which many will be able to, perhaps they'd be more likely to add that unit within or attach to the existing home if they could then get an additional unit on top of that instead of completely demolishing what's there and not being able to have as many units. So this is just a little snippet of the eligibility maps, we're calling them, that were in your staff report. And I know this is hard to see, but it illustrates the lots that would be now with the changes to area, and this is only looking at area, so obviously there will still be other factors that come into play when thinking about or when being able to add additional units on a lot. But looking at existing land use and area, the lots in green will be able to add at least one more unit. So that is 345 or 39% of the lots. And so thinking about the unit bonus, we have a net unit gain without the bonus of 3,040 units. And this is if the lots were to maximize what they could get based on area and what they already have. So it's an addition to what they already have. With the unit bonus, if they preserved what they had and then did the units on top of that, they could get a little bit more, 3,570. And then if all of the properties were demolished in our RMF 30 district and completely wiped clean, which wouldn't happen, but let's say it did, you could get 3,458 units. So you can see with the unit bonus, it kind of offsets that demolition, if that makes sense. So now I'd like to kind of touch on the community concerns that were voiced as we went out to the public with these changes. I kind of just touched on this, but anytime you allow additional housing on a lot, there may be a concern about demolition. And so, like I just mentioned, we're trying to introduce that lot width maximum and the unit bonus to offset that. We also feel like we've been very strategic in the lot areas that we're proposing to use. And at the end of the day, we need to be able to allow multifamily housing in multifamily districts. The second thing that tended to come up was the community was asking, well, how is this facilitating affordable units? And the answer is these text amendments are not facilitating affordable units by HUD's definition, or 80% the area median income. It's not facilitating that directly, but we do feel that by having these smaller lot sizes, it will encourage smaller units that could be more affordable. And then these smaller units can also be established in these walkable neighborhoods where people really want to be. And in general, there's a sentiment that the more units there are, the more there are for people of all income levels. So at the end of the day, these text amendments are just a piece of the puzzle, but we also are working with our Housing and Neighborhood Development Department to facilitate, they facilitate programs that are more directly working with affordable programs. So that was something else that came up. Of course, off-street parking requirements came up, and I just want to clarify that with these text amendments, we're not changing the requirements to off-street parking in the RMF district, but we are looking into that per another project, and so staff is going to work closely to see if any changes to off-street parking in the RMF districts are needed at this time, but with this particular amendment, we're not amending parking. And then the last thing that tended to come up quite a bit was the preservation of Allen Park. And this is a property just across the street from Westminster College. It's 5 acres, and it's zoned RMF 30. And so, however, we understand that preservation of open space is important, but it is a private property, and it's zoned RMF 30 and could be developed with housing today. The other thing to consider is that there is a large stream that runs through the center of the property, and per the riparian corridor rules, there has to be a 50-foot buffer on either side of the stream, so that's also going to limit development. But that is zoned RMF 30, and we wouldn't be taking that park out. So, again, we are recommending that you table this item tonight, but please let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions for Lauren right now?
Well, actually, more of a comment, I guess. I do actually like your presentation. It made really good sense. I know you want us to table it, but I did like everything that I heard. One question I had, currently in the formations that you have, the cottage and the side housing, where's the parking on those currently? Like, do they have parking in those existing structures?
That's a good point, and that's something that the Historic Landmark Commission brought up, parking for cottage-type developments, because as you can see in this picture here, it would be hard to accommodate parking on the site, and those cottages would still be required to have 2 spaces per unit. So that is something, like I said, that the RMF 30 team would like to kind of see if we could reduce the parking for that form in particular. The sideways row houses, they tend to have attached garages with parking underneath, and they're still required to have 2 spaces per unit as well.
Right. Also, there's a couple of areas in Salt Lake that have a really big, what is it called, the strip?
Park strip, yeah.
So would they, for example, be able to like use that as part of parking, or what's the status on those strips?
Unfortunately, they couldn't because that's part of the public way. I wish they could because it's a big area.
They have a lot of problems, huh?
But yeah, they can't use that for parking.
Part of the public way.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't understand the tiny house thing. I mean, is that you can build a tiny house on your property as a ADU, or you just can build a tiny house on a tiny lot? or what?
So right now, if you were to build, and we get a lot of interest in tiny houses. And right now, if you were to want to build a 400 square foot tiny house, you would have to have a 5,000 square foot parcel to do so. And so we are going to reduce that requirement to 1,500 square feet. This differs from an ADU because it doesn't have to be owner occupied. It doesn't have to be tied on the same lot as a single family dwelling like the two projects you saw tonight. So that's how it differs.
It's actually even smaller than an ADU.
Yes, it's smaller, and that is per building code's definition. It doesn't include lofted space, but
You know, I would be really concerned as a neighbor of somebody who's got somebody's sliver of land next door where they build a tiny house. Those things are just cheesy, for the most part. I mean, yeah, you can get some really cute ones, but most of the time they're just cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't see how that really helps us very much.
Okay.
I mean, I think if you're going to I think it's fine to allow a house on a 1,500 square foot lot that's proportional to the lot, but 400 square feet that's not a house. That's a hotel room.
Mm-hmm.
So, I wouldn't
Very
even.
popular, Brenda.
Huh?
They're very popular.
Just get your avocados
They're in.
and open up a tiny home.
Well, I mean, I just think maxing them out at 400 is not necessary. If you have a 1,500 square foot lot, very few of them are that small, I'm sure. But if it's 2,000, I mean, some proportion to the lot, like half of it or a third of it or something.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than
Or square feet's still a
talk
third of
about
the
tiny houses as a thing.
Okay.
Because there's a thing associated with that, and
Maybe the shape, maybe it's too triangular. I don't know.
It's just.
Could someone subdivide a lot? I mean, so I actually like those cottage developments. I thought that was,
Mm-hmm.
even more of those things are cool. I mean, with these tiny homes, I mean, can someone subdivide some of these, like a 5,000 square foot lot into 3 lots and put 3 tiny homes on it? Would that be different than,
So initially with this proposal, we were
there's no minimum width?
Yeah, we were trying to allow lots without street frontage without having to go through the plan development. I don't think that's what we'll end up doing anymore. So if the lots don't have street frontage, with the tiny houses, they might have to go through plan development. But we would, for the cottage and the row house, side-oriented row house, I think the language is now that they can have lots without street frontage for those 2 particular forms. But everything else that doesn't have street frontage would go through plan development.
You couldn't take 5,000 feet, split it up, and then put 3 tiny homes down it?
No, but you could do
A row house or?
cottages and a row house,
Well,
yeah.
I think you could do the tiny house if all of the lots had street frontage. So you could do 3 along.
Yeah. Do you think more about tiny homes? My one question too, with the row houses, I think we've talked a lot about them kind of coming in the side-oriented row houses. And so I like the conversation about the front-oriented development. The other concern that I always have is that you've got that, which I think you've got a 6-foot, you made it larger here, but it's really a neighbor who is on the one side who then ends up with this 30-foot wall
Mm-hmm.
kind of in their backyard. What you've thought about on how we deal with that problem.
So, and initially we proposed a 10 and 10 setback on either side. We reduced it to 6 feet because you're gonna probably have to have a 20-foot driveway on one side, and talking to architects and things of that nature, just based on our widths, the 20 feet and the 10 feet, that's 30 feet already, isn't quite feasible. So we reduced that one side to 6 to try to maintain some kind of buffer. And then again, we're trying to delineate each unit on the interior sides with different design elements, and also require glass to help break up that longer wall. They'll also have to have entry features on each unit. So hopefully that helps. And the design, yeah, the design elements will be required on either side. So like differentiation in building materials, articulation of a certain distance, things of that nature. So we will put those requirements on both sides. And then here in this district, the height is 30 feet. So with pitched roof, that will help a little bit. It can't go too high, just something to keep in mind. Yeah.
Mike's on, and thinking about how the zone, how long has it been? When was the last time it was updated? Do you know?
1995, right, Wayne?
And was it? I mean, it seems like as you read it and think about it, it seems like the intent was to intensify development with less single-family homes and more with like condos, apartment buildings. But Cindy's raising her hand, so she'll probably just yell at me in the public hearing. But I mean, just to me, and where they're located too. I mean, they're located on these major thoroughfares. All right, we'll listen to Cindy's comment here. She's going to address it for me.
Cindy talk.
So, you can answer if you want, but I'm getting like some daggers. So
You mean in terms of why the zone is the way it is and was.
Yeah, I mean, and so like even then, like, you know, making sure we have maximum lot, was the idea that a developer would buy up a few lots and try to make it into a just more dense urban area, but maybe it's not that way. So
I mean, yeah, because when you actually look at the area requirements, we're not getting multifamily development.
like, was the intent to get rid of some of the small narrow lots and put up, to upzone it. I mean, so people then buying two lots, merging them together and building bigger, more significant buildings in what is moving towards a downtown core. But I have no idea what the context was, and I'm gonna get some here in a minute. So it's
Yeah, I can't totally speak to that.
Okay.
Any more questions for Lauren?
Well, I tell you, I'm concerned about some unintended consequences of especially the design guidelines in general, fine, but the ones for the side-oriented ones. I think that, for example, requiring delineation. I mean, that is really, you could potentially have some really nasty, this one's brick and this one's block and this one's, shiplap, and then this was, I really don't want to have the consequence that we have on some of our buildings now where people are trying to make them seem as if they're 2 or 3 or 10 buildings, where you have so many multiples of materials and going in and out and all this stuff that the whole building can no longer make architectural sense. So I would take the delineation out, as long as as long as each dwelling unit has its own entrance, it's going to have a delineation.
Yeah, they will.
The entrance is all by themselves delineated.
Okay. And we did want to work on fine-tuning that delineation language, because it could be a little bit subjective too. So maybe we can think about if it's necessary. But it was in an effort.
Be necessary. I think anybody worth their salt, and sometimes you want things to hang together. Supposing you're doing a sort of federal brick thing with white, and you want, each door being the same, but every unit being pretty much the same. And that's pretty cool,
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be this kind of flibberty-jib, but
yeah,
necessary.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, Lauren, we'll let you step back. I think we'll open this public hearing and we're going to leave it open till the next meeting, assuming we're going to table this at the request of staff. So I'm going to open the public hearing on this item. I have cards from three ladies here. Do I just like go, which one goes first? Lynn, you got the first spot.
Funny. My name is Lynn Schwartz. I'm Vice Chair of the Sugar House Community Council Land Use and Zoning Committee. The allowing of cottage developments and side-oriented row houses without special approval is asking for developments which will cut out community involvement, which is clearly felt to be an impediment. We feel the community should be involved in what goes into the community. Also, with all the increased density and streamlining of ostensibly burdensome regulations and supposedly unnecessary community input, there is no requirement for affordable units. Hoping and praying that affordability will magically occur is daydreaming of the highest order. I can tell you that what you will end up with is exactly what is happening in Sugar House, which is increased density with almost no affordability. Thank you.
Thank you. Judy, you're next.
Can't believe there aren't more community councils here to talk about this. My name is Judy Short, Sugar House Community Council. We reviewed this and sent out flyers and had our trustees talk to people that lived in some of these areas that are affected in Sugar House. And I was pretty amazed that we didn't get too many objections. The places that are labeled in Sugar House are the Greystone Apartments and the Elizabeth Street condos. Both of those are pretty much senior housing, all owner occupied. I've been in many of the units. They're all well kept up. I know that the Elizabeth Street ones were built in 71, and the Forest Glen condos in 78, and the Greystone in 60. So I guess they're getting older, but they're well maintained. So we didn't seem to feel that this was, I'll call it a threat, to tear those down and put in twice as many units on those spaces. I don't think that might happen in 50 years, but nobody's worried about it now. The place people liked to see some development was along 7th East and 9th East, where the lots are wide, and you've seen a few places where they're like 110 feet deep. And so those are places that some of this would fit. And many of those are in need of upgrades. So we kind of saw both sides of the argument. I think Lynn is absolutely right. And I've been toying with the idea of putting together a slideshow and trying to talk to Nick about showing it to you, to show you the wonderful over-the-counter permits and the houses that result from those, because they're pretty terrible. Some are fine, but there are a lot of really bad monstrosities. And if you start digging in little, divide a 75-foot lot into two and put 2 strips of things, I think it could be pretty interesting. And we get screamed at all the time from the people that live above 13th East that all the development in Sugar House, all those apartments, is ruining their neighborhood. It's 2 miles away, but it's ruining their neighborhood. So there's a community feel that has to be. And the other thing, I'm glad you're tabling this, because I haven't really gotten into the weeds and looked at all the different details. Tandem parking is really a terrible idea. The second car always parks on the street, unless it's really, really bad. So that just causes more confusion. There's a comment in there that there are 1,028 parcels that are 0.6 of an acre, or 2,613 feet. And if the minimum is 2,500, that sounds like a lot. But it's really not. There's no space around these homes, especially if you put a driveway, and a garage. I think you need a penalty for removing housing. You know, you might be taking out a 3-plex and putting in a 10-plex. That's great. But what if you're taking out an old dilapidated 4-plex and building a monster home? I think there needs a penalty. And the cottage development, 1,000 square feet of open space, I would bet this room is probably close to 3,000 square feet. I mean, 1,000 square feet is not much if you're going to have 8 homes. And that space is included, the driveway and the sidewalks are part of that 1,000 square feet. So I think there's some issues that need to really be looked at. And I don't think they're going to be affordable. Nothing new is affordable. And so the more you take down a 14-plex building to put in 6 new townhomes, you've lost 8 units and tripled the rental price. I think that's part of the reason we have so many people that don't have housing right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. Cindy, save the best for last.
For you to think about. So I own 6 properties in the RMF 30 and 35 zoning classifications. They're all located in National Register districts. I have managed rental properties since the mid-1970s, and I probably have more experience with affordable rental properties than anyone working in this building because of my age. And for the past year and a half, I've been saying to the planning staff, this is the wrong place to start in an effort to increase density. I have no objection at all to increased density. I can show you the difference in the performance of a building with 4 units and one with 6 units. The 6-unit building performs better. You are fortunate tonight. If you have any questions about the intent of the 1995 ordinance when the RMF zones were initiated, you can ask Judy and me because we were both on the Planning Commission. The other person who would know is Doug Danzig, and he left as I was coming in. So the handout is a picture of a house of cards, and I'm asking you to think of the structure as containing the unsubsidized affordable units in the city. 2 of the cards holding up this structure of unsubsidized affordable units are the requirements of minimum lot width and minimum lot size. These 2 requirements in the existing ordinance are more effective in protecting the existing affordable units than the overlay for a historic district. I'm going to say that again because it's original and it's potent. The requirements in the RMF 30 zone for lot size and lot width are more effective than the overlay zone for historic districts. We have lost in the Central City Historic District 52 contributing structures since the district was initiated. Historic district status does not protect a viable historic building. The research that the staff has done is meticulous. I say that every time I talk about this, but we could accomplish more by doing the things that Dr. Chris Nelson told us to do, and I've identified those. At issue for me are, they're itemized there, the economics here are the assumption that economics are not relevant to what happens here, that the Planning Commission doesn't deal with economics, is just going to lead us to disaster. Economics are highly relevant. They are relevant to me. I use the tax advantages on my properties, and when those tax advantages for depreciation are exhausted, I have a building that I'm in love with, but it no longer has tax advantages, and other landlords are not in love with their buildings the way I am. And construction costs are a deciding factor. And if I asked a contractor to protect the existing building while he was constructing a new building in the rear yard, he would elevate the price considerably because of the liability issues and because of the amount of time it would take to work around the existing structure. This is just not real world to think that you're going to be able to incentivize with some unit bonus preserving the existing structure. It's not going to work. It's going to be much more cost-effective to tear everything down and start over. They're missing informations here. The design standards, I'm sorry, but they are not working. They work somewhat in the historic districts with the Landmarks Commission. They're not working elsewhere. Vacant buildings, the city doesn't even know what it has in vacant properties. It knows what it has in boarded properties. But in vacant residential structures, it has no clue. I do, because when I go around Flyers, I can see how much dust there is on the porch and that nobody's come and gone. There are obstacles to putting these vacant structures back into service, and the city's not dealing with that. The city hasn't dealt with the cost of losing an unsubsidized affordable unit. So what's the value of an unsubsidized affordable unit? I mean, what the city is doing, if I can just tantrum for a moment more, is it's shifting the burden of affordable housing from where it is in the marketplace now to taxpayers who will have to subsidize every new unit of affordable housing. What's affordable that exists is what's at risk here with this proposal. And then I think there are a whole bunch of master plans that haven't been addressed. If you're going to amend them, then go ahead. You have the authority to recommend amendments to the Central Community Master Plan and other master plans, like the Preservation Plan. And we also paid for the National Register nomination for the Binion and the Douglas neighborhoods. We paid for that with CDBG funding. And this just runs roughshod over that city policy. So I think there's some documents that haven't been included. I think there's some issues. This is the toughest place to start. This RMF 30, and if you ask me a question about the intent in 95, I'll be happy to explain. But I've already gone over my 2 minutes, I'm sure, and Wayne has been very indulgent. Well, I wasn't speaking on behalf of Community Council, only on behalf of my buildings, which are all severely threatened unless I put them in a housing trust by this proposal. So, if you want me to tell you what was going on in 95, Judy and I can tell you we were both on the Planning Commission at the time, and there was a whole mindset then, and that's why you have what you have. And it has nothing to do with major streets. It has to do with the intent of the 95 ordinance, which is one of the few times I ever agreed with Bill Wright, who was the planning director.
Okay. Thank you. Do you want to ask the question? So why don't you tell us what the intention was in 95?
So I argued constantly with Bill Wright during my tenure on the Planning Commission. And one time he said the 95 ordinance was a massive downzoning. And I got ready to argue with him, and I realized he was right. And I couldn't argue with him. It was an absolutely massive downzoning. If you look at the Bryant neighborhood, we had gotten it downzoned thinking we were accomplishing something in 85 from an R6 and an R7 to an R5. Those numbers at the end are the number of floors in the zone. So we're talking about an area that's now, that I've invested in, that's now an RMF 30. It was zoned for 5 floors of residential housing before the 95 ordinance. Okay, so the 95 ordinance was a massive downzoning, and there was an effort to avoid making tons of stuff non-conforming. All right, so then you get the patchwork quilt. But the mindset 29 years ago was a big downzoning across the residential areas of the city, and things went from an R3 to an R2, things went from an R5 to an RMF 30, 35, and so that's why you see the mix of the single family that survived and some multiple units, which are now non-conforming as to density. So my sixplex, it's non-conforming as all get out to density. I could maybe get a single family residence on the parcel now, maybe. So that was the mindset then. That is not meeting our needs now, but what we did then inadvertently, unintentionally, protected a lot of existing housing. And that's the only stuff that can approach affordability without a subsidy. In the tantrum. That's how it happened.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak on this topic? Okay, seeing none, do we need a motion to?
Yes, Madam Chairman, I move to table.
No, to continue the public hearing, or do they?
And continue the public hearing.
Okay, you can
You
do it
just
that
keep
way.
it open.
Okay, we'll just leave it open, okay? And you moved,
I move to table
Brenda-
this discussion.
Brenda moved to table it. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Carolyn seconds. The motion is to table, yes?
I mean, I would ask if you have any feedback on maybe what you've heard, this would be a great time to give us some feedback.
My only thing that I'm like, I'll be quick, 'cause it seems like we've got these zones that are trying to protect some historic housing. I'd be interested in staff presenting when they come back, talking about this concept as we're tearing down these old homes, if we're actually losing units, right? I mean, I'm sure, I know there's affordability problems with people building new stuff, but, actually, if we're looking at, when I was reading a report by the Kem Gardner Institute or whatever that talks about the number of new units that have come on board and stuff. So are we actually losing units, this comment? Because, and then, but that piece, but it seems like to me there's this discussion, like we're using the zoning district, which even Cindy kind of spoke to, where it's like, it's zoned away to protect a historic. So should those properties not be zoned RMF 30? Should they be zoned something else? And then, do we need, it seems like RMF 30 should be a transitional zone to help move into a more urban area. And maybe those properties that we're trying to protect, it seems dumb to have a zoning ordinance that's designed to, there's got to be a better way to protect them, but my 2 cents.
And sorry, I wasn't quite following the first.
The housing thing?
Yeah, the concept
So
of
Cindy
losing.
and Judy both mentioned that, and this happening in Sugar House, that people are tearing down homes and they're tearing down old apartment buildings, putting up new, expensive, high dollar stuff. And then my understanding is that we've really been increasing housing stock in the city, or it's kind of, at least that's what this report from the Kem Gardner Institute would seem to imply. And I'm just kind of curious to kind of dig into that a little bit more as the staff can look into, like, are we actually increasing units? How many units, I assume it, I'm not sure maybe this report I'm reading is just talking about the number of new units going in, but it's not a net unit discussion. Right, my assumption is we've added units, but maybe I'm wrong. So that's what that point was just getting at.
If I can respond to that, we have these numbers and I can bring them back next time and make it more clear, but we project just on land area alone that we could gain just over 2,000 units, and that's a net gain of existing and what could be added at 3,040. And then with the bonus, if you were to preserve, that would be 3,570 units. If all the units were demolished and every developer was to start over, that would be 3,458 units. So if that kind of helps answer some of your question, but I can have it clear for you.
No, it's not about the potential, right? It's about what's happening now, right? Are we seeing that places that are old, new buildings are going to be more expensive than old apartment building, right? So what the comment was made that we're taking a 6-unit duplex or townhome, tearing it down and putting in 4 expensive, nice condos, right? And is that, I just want to know if that's actually like happening.
It's hard to
Where that's happening.
It's hard to get those numbers without doing like the performance and things like that. But we did kind of look at that, and it's such a case by case thing. However, construction costs are really high. And if in the RMF district, like we've seen, things are, if you have a multifamily building in the RMF districts, they're probably grandfathered in terms of you have many more units than you could have today or have with the changes. And so what we find is it's not worthwhile to tear down for fewer, more expensive units most of the time if you have significantly more than what could be allowed. I don't want to speak for every single case, but that's...
I mean, I'm on a very, very high level, and this is poorly articulated, so I'll work on it between now and when you come back. But
Sure.
it seems like we have these historic neighborhoods and homes, which everyone loves them. That we're trying to protect, and we've designed a zone that's multifamily to try to do that. And there's some weird constrictions in it that maybe was designed to try to keep and protect those, and maybe successfully did. At the same time, we're also trying to increase housing stock. The argument coming from the city is that, and I think it is a supply and demand argument, that the more supply out there, maybe in the short run, these are market rate, but in the long run, the more supply that's out there, the better off we're all going to be in terms of housing cost.
Right.
Right. But then I'm also looking at your numbers. And so one, I want to make, we're not really increasing the units necessarily, right? So we're not we're not actually adding more supply, the argument, with some of the numbers you have there. And so I almost want, are we being bold enough, or because we're not, also the units we're adding to, like adding 3,000 units is, I don't know how many people normally live in a unit, but say that's 6,000 people. We're a city population with 220,000, 6,000 new residents is just nowhere near going to address the pressures that we have on our housing stock.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just this, I mean, I think it's always the balance we're trying to figure out, but how do you, we all do, I think, want to protect the historic, nice, neighborhoods that's got an authentic feel that we're losing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we want to have this transitional multifamily housing, and we want to increase supply drastically, I think, to deal with the affordability of housing costs. And the proposal even here, I'm not sure if it is bold enough to accomplish that goal.
Okay, yeah. And I would say it's more of a moderate proposal in terms of the lot area reductions. So we can look at that.
I would, just the issue with that a little bit, though, is we are talking about the lowest density of the RMF zones. And so that's I think why you're seeing, definitely the more modest approach here. As we, if this is a concept that as it moves through the city council, gets approved, the intent then would be to start working on the other RMF zones, which are by nature right now supposed to be more dense.
But also built into this ordinance, though, or this zone, which is the challenging part, is this, in some ways, a historic preservation type goal. And I think they should. I mean, Cindy could probably speak more, but just do you rezone those? Do you better address that historic preservation concept in another way, rather than a zoning way, or rezone those properties that you really care about to something else, so they actually are better protected and maintained? That's the goal, and then allow a more bold initiative on the parts that you're not really caring about historic preservation on. So you actually do get upscale, you do get more development, more density. You don't get these townhomes of 3 different units. You get more cottage. You don't get these like slot homes that are kind of going in weirdly next to a single family home. You actually get people buying up multiple properties and doing larger developments.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels more like an urban center. But we're trying to solve everyone's problems, and the problems at their core, the 2 different problems, the historic preservation one and the increasing supply, are in direct conflict.
Yes.
And,
Well, not necessarily. If you tear down an affordable unit and build 6 non-affordable units, then you haven't increased the affordable housing at all. So.
Well, it's affordable now because it's an old.
It's affordable now because it's old.
That one unit
there's
itself.
Not much demand for it.
One unit itself may remain affordable, but the existing pressures on every other parcel are higher because you have less supply. Right? I mean, that's on the supply and demand argument, right? So if you tear down one affordable unit, you lose one affordable property, but on the aggregate and a big enough level, you're just not. You need to increase supply to make. Everyone else is all the other properties are going to go up because you're keeping that one because you've got less supply.
You're saying that all the other affordable units would go up in price because we're losing supply of affordable units?
No, if you're in general, like, because protecting one affordable house, yes, that one remains affordable, but everyone else's housing is going to go up a little bit because you just have less supply.
Any more comments?
I'm a little bit concerned in general with the RMF 30 zoning districts because I don't think there's much consistency in the way that the design, the typologies are working out along the street. So you have, a big apartment building, a little house, then you might have a tiny house, and then you might have a cottage house, and then you might have a sideways house, and then a big apartment project. I mean, is there nothing we can do about that? Because consistency of typology is one of the most important urban design principles we have. We know that you have house, or townhouse, for 17 blocks, in Beacon Hill or something. That's a high density but consistent urban format. And so what we're doing here is encouraging, nay, even asking for a hodgepodge of different typologies.
And that's because we're trying to appease two very different goals.
I mean, I don't know the answer to that other than to be more specific about what you can redevelop into. So it's, you can do an apartment building here. That's it. It has to be this big and that tall and, on this wide a lot. So it doesn't actually, so what we've done is to take an existing building fabric, and offered it to be torn down. I think that's what, the RMF 30 does. If you said, okay, you can take your existing house and make it bigger and make it 2 units, cool. Expand it to a duplex or something. I mean, then you still have a sort of neighborhood that has consistency. Well, ADUs, yeah, right.
So we'll go back and think about all this.
Without having to actually own, and without the owner having to live in it.
We'll go back and like Lauren said, it was our intent as we rolled through that we knew we needed to clean up some ordinance language on this, but we'll go back considering the meeting and what you all said and try to address it as well as we can. We may just come back with, when Brenda, it's interesting because it's the consistent typology. Some of the neighborhoods in Salt Lake, some of the more interesting neighborhoods are those that have kind of various housing styles along the street. So it is an interesting concept to, I guess, kind of debate on that. But it's something we'll go back and we'll take all this into consideration and come back with some information for you to consider.
Tweak your ordinance a little more?
Yes.
And we'll have another opportunity for more input from the public.
Yes, definitely.
So I know it was a little while ago, somebody made a motion and then we had a second, but we haven't voted on it.
No, I know we haven't voted on it yet. But we're
Started to
having
wonder.
the discussion.
All right.
Any more discussion?
I think the only thing that I'll say, I've been quiet because I think my mind was blown for some reason. Because I was with you and I was going through this and getting it and understanding the purpose and what you're doing, and the discussion and the comments from the public has really kind of made me go starting to kind of panic about the unintended consequences of it all.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I feel like I need to go back through it and think through it again. So I think I'm pre-warning that I'm, and I think I don't know. I don't really have good direction. I feel so bad not having good direction, but I just need to process a little bit more to see it from this new light. So
Okay.
So maybe when we come back, we'll have, everybody will be prepared.
I'm prepared.
No, I mean really,
I will try to get my thoughts in
think
order.
about it
and
between
I really
now
do
and
appreciate the
then.
public comments because it really does force thinking through things in a different way. So I appreciate that. So.
okay, can we take a vote? And the motion is to table this until the next time, and we're leaving the public hearing open. And we had a motion and a second. So, Matt,
Yes.
Carolyn,
Yes.
Weston,
Yes.
Brenda,
Yes.
Andreas.
I do want to say, I think you're in the right direction. I really liked your presentation and made sense. It was very nice and straightforward in my view, so yes. Yes.
Yes, okay. The motion to table passes, so we're leaving this item open. And there's no other business, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.